Our speaker today comes to us from the Caregiver Action Network. Nichole Goble coordinates support groups and Nichole and manages caregiver roundtables to share information and experiences. A family caregiver herself, Nichole has experience on both sides of the coin. So, Nichole, if you'd like to take it from here.
All right. Well, I'm so excited that you all could be here. As James said, my name is Nichole, and I'm with Caregiver Action Network, and I'll introduce myself a little bit more officially here in just a second. But I'm really excited to be sharing some 10 tips for how caregivers can help. How there are some really great resources and tips that can help in a navigation of transitions in care. And transitions is always that tricky word, right? Because it means so many things, especially in the world of caregiving. We can be talking about transitioning a loved one from a hospital setting or rehab or assisted living setting to home. We could be talking about the flip side of that. We could also be talking about transition age youth with significant healthcare issues and how changes in care are part of a transition. So hopefully I'll be touching on things that are relevant kind of across the board, because I think there's some really good bits here. So first, I want to say a huge thank you to Tracy and Ruben Law for having us here as part of the Caregiver Symposium. This is our first time here, and what an absolute treat. It has been just really wonderful working with you, and so excited to see the content that you guys have been able to share and facilitate. And I really hope that everyone has really been getting a lot of great stuff that they can kind of file away in their caregiver toolbox. Well, as I said, my name is Nichole, and I'm the Director of Community Initiatives at Caregiver Action Network. I've been with the organization now for 7 years. And basically what I do at CAN is I do a lot of work in terms of development and implementation of programs, as well as doing a lot of our direct one-on-one communication with family caregivers. So if you reach out to Caregiver Action Network and you are a family caregiver, you're probably going to chat with me, which is pretty exciting. And I also get the opportunity to do amazing events like this. So yeah, I'm a busy bee, but I absolutely adore it. But on top of the work that I do at CAN, and I know that I don't just speak for myself, but I speak for all of my colleagues at CAN. And when I say colleagues, we are a very small national organization. We are a group of 8, if you can imagine that. So, but one of the unique things about our organization, besides our size, is that we all come to this work not only because we're really passionate about it in terms of career and helping individuals, and that really kind of being part of our DNA, I think, but because all of us are coming to this work having caregiver experience. We've all been a caregiver. We all are a caregiver. And for some of us, myself included, we have also needed care. I'm an individual that was born with a rare disability. And so I'm a long distance caregiver for my mom with advanced COPD. And she will very much tell you that she is my long distance caregiver as well. So I've been at a conference in Arizona this week, and she has texted me every morning to say, do you take your meds? Are you taking your blood pressure? How are you doing? Are you okay? And then I do the same thing to her. So, you know, there's a lot of uniqueness in all of these caregiving situations. But like I said, I speak for myself and for many of my colleagues who have similar experiences as well. So a little bit about our organization. We serve the over 90 million family caregivers in the United States. So yes, 8 people serving 90 million family caregivers in the US. Now that may be a number that seems a lot larger than what you've read or seen elsewhere. And let me break it down a couple of ways. But the first way I'm going to break it down is that when we say 90 million, we are really talking about the lifespan of caregiving. So everyone from that parent that is caring for a newborn with disability, chronic condition, significant healthcare needs, like my situation with my mom, to a sibling that's caring for a brother or sister with an intellectual or developmental disability or other kind of chronic condition, spouse caring for their partner that's just been diagnosed with cancer. And what I think that sometimes a lot of people stereotypically think in their mind as a caregiver is caring for that aging relative or loved one. You know, a grandparent, a parent, a neighbor that's older and dealing with what we call either the frailties of old age, although I think it's a little bit nicer to say the impacts of aging, and also conditions that are associated with that, like Alzheimer's and dementia, etc. So we're really talking about the lifespan. So that's really where we get that 90 million. But there's more. There's lots of caregiving scenarios that filter into that 90 million. So there are people who are brand spanking new to caregiving. Maybe their loved one just got diagnosed. Maybe they have just entered in to that role of caregiving. Whatever kind of that scenario may be, they are new to family caregiving. Then there are folks that have been a family caregiver for a hot minute. So we are talking about family caregivers that are caring for a loved one with those chronic conditions, disabilities, maybe someone that's just, you know, had some health issues for a while. And so they will often come to us saying, hey, we've been here, we know what we know, we do what we do, but my loved one's condition has changed and I need some new resources, or my situation has changed. I need some new resources to help me out. Or I just want some new stuff to kind of put in that toolbox as a caregiver, because the stuff that I have just isn't working the same anymore. Then there is the what we call the employed caregiver. So these are people that are balancing work and caregiving. And there's some really special and unique challenges that can come with that, as I'm sure many of you know firsthand. So they come to us looking for ways that they can make some of that day-to-day work of balancing those responsibilities, being able to be there for their loved one and care for their loved one, as well as, you know, be an employee, meet deadlines, etc. Then there is the what we call the long distance caregiver. So someone who maybe lives across the state, across the country. With one of our partners, they have people deployed globally. So maybe they're across the globe, but they're still an integral part of that care team. And so they say, well, what can we do? What resources are out there to help us stay better connected to our loved one and better execute our role as a caregiver? So all of that to say, no two caregiving situations are the same. So of that 90 million family caregivers that are in the US, there are 90 million unique caregiving situations. Two people can be caring for an individual of the same age with the same condition. So many similarities in their caregiving kind of situation from a logistical standpoint, but there's going to be just a gazillion unique factors that make the way that they're a caregiver, the way that they provide care to their loved one, very unique. And of course, that means that some of the things that we're going to be talking about today, obviously talking a little bit in generalities, but think about how these apply, A, maybe to your caregiving situation right now, and B, what if your caregiving situation changes? Going back to what I said earlier, maybe your loved one's health condition changes. Maybe your health changes and things that you need for support as a caregiver change. So many of these things can be in flux. So also think about how these things can factor into that as well. So before I get into the nitty-gritty stuff here, I got to give a shout out. It is November 3rd, and November is National Family Caregivers Month. And one of the great things that is part of being a member of the Caregiver Action Network team is that we get to take a lead for National Family Caregivers Month, and we get to set the theme every year. So this year's theme is Caregivers Connect. And surprise, that's what you guys are doing right now. You guys are connecting. And what we mean by Caregivers Connect, obviously, like I said, what we're doing now, we're caregivers, we're connecting, we're sharing. So that's a huge piece of it. But also caregivers connecting with their loved ones. We often feel like we can lose ourselves in our caregiver role and forget that we have a relationship, a dynamic with our loved one outside of that caregiver role and care recipient role. So we're really talking about that. And of course, because we're an organization and we're in DC, we're based out of DC, but we're a national organization, gotta make that distinction. We're also talking about connecting policymakers to caregivers so that when they are making laws that have an impact on healthcare and the role that caregivers can play in being part of their loved one's care, that the caregiver voice is heard. So all of that is kind of interwoven into Caregivers Connect. So much of what we do is going to be shared on social media, opportunities for you to share your caregiving story. And I'll get to how you can kind of engage with us on that at the very end. All right. To the good stuff here. First, I want to talk about the 10 tips for family caregivers. So like I said, these are kind of our general go-to good 10 tips that across any of the caregiving scenarios that I kind of hashed out earlier, these are really good. These seem really solid and work. These are things that caregivers, whether you're caring for a child with a significant healthcare need, you're caring for a partner or a spouse with a condition or an older loved one, these are things that are so important to kind of have in your back pocket and keep in mind. Number 1, seek support from other caregivers. Well, you can check that off. You're here, you're learning, you are engaging. In the chat, I know I was able to join at the very end of the last session, and I saw some great things happening in the chat. So that's really exciting. But also like joining support groups, chatting with other folks that have a unique understanding of what you're going through. That's so important, not just in terms of feeling like you're not alone, but it's great information sharing. It's so pivotal. Taking care of yourself. I know that we hear that all the time, and I'm going to say something that's even more cliche. We all know the airplane analogy, right? That if you're on an airplane and the oxygen masks come down, what are you supposed to do? You got to put it on yourself first before you can help someone else. It's true that if you're not able to take care of yourself, if you're not in a place that you're in good shape, you're not going to be able to be there for support for someone else. It's going to be a lot harder, and it can be pretty detrimental. So it's really, really important that you take care of yourself, obviously for you, so that you're feeling good and you're doing well, but so that you're there as a strong support for your loved one. Accept offers of help. This is a hard one. I think especially as caregivers, we want to feel like we can do it all, right? We want to feel like we've got it all laid out and that we don't need any help. If we accept help, we can feel like we're letting our loved ones down and that we're not doing the job that we need to be doing. But that's not the case. We can't do it all on our own. We all need help in all kinds of various forms. But even outside of caregiving, sometimes you'll be struggling with something, you'll really need help, and someone will say, "Can I help you? Is there something I can do for you?" And you just kind of look at them like a deer in headlights and are like, "Nope, I'm good, thank you." But there are things that they can do to help, but we can't think of them. Well, a quick tip for that, write things down. As you think of things that you're comfortable letting folks kind of chip in with, and it can be small things, it can be big things, write them down. Let the folks that are part of your kind of support network know about them. Put voice to them. Say, "Hey, could someone come and, take mom to the doctor's appointment next week? I have a work meeting and I'm not going to be able to get out of it. I thought I would, but I really need someone that can take mom to the appointment." So, if you're able to do that, let me know. I'll get you the information and you'll be all set. Learn how to communicate with healthcare professionals. This is horrifying, right? This is absolutely, oh no. So yes, back to what I was saying. Communicating with healthcare professionals is horrifying because, and I'll share a little bit of a story. I was a caregiver for my grandfather who had bone cancer. I was just out of college, just started really my first, big kid job. And my grandfather was diagnosed. He had hid his diagnosis from us for a while because my grandmother had COPD. She had just passed, and he had wanted us to all be focused on her. So by the time that we found out that he had bone cancer, it was progressing pretty quickly. So what we did was come up with a plan, right? And that plan included me saying, "All right, well, I'll take a leave of absence and we're going to be roommates. I'm moving in with you so I can be there to help," because he was starting to quickly have more and more mobility issues and things were just really escalating. So I started going to appointments with him. And the first appointment that I went to his oncologist with him, I was petrified. I was afraid that if I asked the wrong question, if I said the wrong thing, and I knew logically in my mind this was the most ridiculous thing in the world, but I couldn't help myself but think it. I'm like, they're gonna take him away from me. They're not gonna let him come home with me because they're gonna think that I'm completely incapable of providing care because I'm asking, this most ridiculous question. And no, we have to be able to ask those questions. We need to learn ways that we can really effectively communicate with doctors because as a caregiver, you know your loved one better than anyone else. And it is so important that you are able to share with them symptom changes, side effects to medications, just a whole gamut of things. And so that's a really important skill to have. Taking breaks. We don't like to do it, but we need to. We call it respite. It's when either, a family member or a friend comes by and hangs out with your loved one so that you have a little bit of a break. You can run errands, you can do whatever you need to do. You can go have coffee with a friend, take a long bath, whatever. Whatever's going to get you in a good place, calm, and just let you have a little bit of me time and a moment to check out of a caregiving situation because we can't be on 24/7. It's just not possible. Caregiving is kind of 24/7, but we need at least a little bit of a break to be able to disconnect. and focus on ourselves. So this is really important, watching out for signs of depression. So caregiving is hard. I think that goes without saying, and it can have huge impacts on physical and mental health. And I think sometimes we gloss over the mental health component a bit. The stress, the strain, the just complexities of the role can be really challenging. And things like depression, anxiety can really start to rear their head in some pretty prominent ways. It's important to stay on top of that. And when it becomes to a point that it's not manageable, you need to let the professionals know. You need to let your doctor know, hey, I'm really struggling with this and I don't know what to do, so that you can start to get the help and interventions that you need. Again, going back to being in the best shape and being as strong as you can for yourself and for your loved one. Being open to new technologies. Hey, I am of a certain age and there are new tech things coming out all the time that I just don't comprehend. But technology is a really valuable tool, especially I think a lot as a long distance caregiver. There's so many little gadgets and gizmos that are so helpful in being able to stay connected to your loved one and really execute in your role as a caregiver. So, you know, the old saying, there's an app for that. Well, if you're struggling with something as a caregiver, maybe ask, hey, is there an app for that? Because there just might be, and it could be a huge, huge help in making your day-to-day a little bit easier. All right, the last little bit here, and I'm gonna lump these two together, the organizing your medical information and your legal documents. So we have a piece of our website where we talk about the patient file. The patient file is basically a place where you hold all of your loved ones' pertinent information, medical information, your legal documents like DNRs, powers of attorney. A lot of people don't realize that there are two forms of a power of attorney. There's the financial and the medical. So it's important to have all of that together. Coworker once shared a story about how she was meeting her father at the ER. He had been rushed there. So she got the call at work that they were taking him in an ambulance. She was going to go and meet him there. And she gets there, she rushes in, and she meets the doctor, and he says, does your dad have a DNR? And she's like, yes, he does, and let me go get it. It's in the car. And he said, that's not very helpful. I need it right now. So it's important to have all of those things together and accessible in those emergency situations and when you're at a doctor's appointment. I have been caught off guard when a doctor has said, oh, well, what dosage of that medication are you on? And I'm like, well, it's changed about 18 times over the course of my life. So pick a number between 4 and 8, and that's accurate. So it's important to have that information there because it's important. And the last thing, give yourself credit. Caregiving is hard, and we don't give ourselves credit for doing the best that we can. It often feels like we're messing up all the time, that we're not doing enough, that we're falling short, but you're there for your loved one and you're doing the best you can. So give yourself that credit. All right, so now I'm quickly going to go through ways that you can address some of the changes in care. And really this boils down to thinking like a care manager. So thinking almost like a team manager for like a sports team. So ways that you have to contextualize your role is thinking about your loved one's ability to function independently, both physically and cognitively, because that's always kind of the goal, right? We always want our loved ones to be as independent as possible. And so that should always be a goal. We should always be sure that, all of these things are kind of part and parcel with the decisions that we're part of. And that goes into the status of your loved one's health and complexity of care. Everyone's going to be unique. If your loved one needs more additional hands-on care and has some more severe or significant medical needs, that's obviously going to influence some of the decisions that you're making. So also think about the changes and how that may factor and change over a period of time, especially with conditions that are progressive. Think about, are there medical devices in the home? So, folks that have feeding tubes, heart machines, oxygen, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Thinking about, well, is this going to change over time? Is there a possibility it could change over time? How is this factoring into an overall plan? And also think about training. Are you trained in their maintenance? My mom is on oxygen, and so when she started needing oxygen all the time, the first time I went home, her nurse came and gave me the 101 on how to make sure everything was working properly. I have a great nephew who is adorable and young and very rambunctious and likes to play with buttons and wires and tubing. And as much as we try to say, that's probably not great to do for him, he will get it in time, but we just have to be able to stay on top of it. But that meant knowing what to do, how to, replug everything in, reset everything properly so that mom wasn't in a bad way. So be thinking about the physical environment, and is this accessible? Can it be adapted? So there are organizations and businesses that work to adapt homes for mobility issues, etc. Can it accommodate the power needs for some of those medical devices that I talked about earlier? Think about responsibilities at work, at home, and in the community. So we're not just caregivers, we're lots of different things. So think about all the things that you're juggling and how that can impact changes in care. And think about your own health and physical abilities. Our health changes. Our physical capacities for things change. So always be thinking about those things as well. Financial resources, just like, all things change. Income may change. Be thinking about how that will have an impact on care. Legal documents, allowing you to make financial decisions and healthcare decisions. So that was a change that we had to make when I was caregiving for my grandpa. I became his medical power of attorney. Now, he still really called the shots for sure. He would be very upset if I didn't state that first and foremost. But being able to, in a situation that was needed, be able to be that kind of voice for him, that was a change that needed to happen. So again, as care needs change, be thinking about that. And this is something especially, if you're caring for someone that was born or that has a long-term chronic condition or disability, their condition can change over time. And so these needs may change over time. And then the availability of members of what I call the care team. So other family, friends, community members, that are that support network that help provide some of that care to your loved one. So let's talk about a few other things that are really specific to not necessarily addressed within the changes in care, but things to make sure that the changes in care happen very smoothly. So going back to, keeping all of that information up to date and together, it's really important. Always make sure that your loved one's patient file, those legal documents are not just together, but that they're not years old. Make sure that they're up to date, test results, any updates on diagnosis, legal documents, again, powers of attorney, DNRs, living wills, those types of things. All of that is together. Regularly assess your loved one's home environment. So think about, again, going back to that accessibility. When my mom was first diagnosed, she could get around pretty well. Now she can't. She can't go up and down stairs. She has the oxygen tank that she takes with her. So we really have to do some finessing in our house to make sure that she could get around. Everything from like, all right, mom, we don't need like this big floopy rug in the bathroom because you're having to take your oxygen off to use the bathroom because it's too difficult for you to wheel the oxygen tank. Just move the rug, because taking your oxygen off, probably not a great choice, but research available public and private services and resources. These things are always changing. Organizations are always providing new supports and services. So if you have people that are helping you coordinate some of that, check in with them regularly. Let folks know, hey, this is changing. What's out there? What can I do? Communication between the care team. So as a caregiver, one of your roles as part of that care manager, that team manager, is that you kind of have to keep communication flowing and let everyone know what's going on. And so that can mean letting folks know, hey, here's this change in what's happening over here. Hey, we need to make a change for this. This has happened. You really have to keep all of that consistent and make sure that everyone who needs to be looped in is looped in, so that the care that your loved one is getting stays appropriate. All right, coordinating with the professional care team. And I'm going to go through this fairly quick because I feel like there's a lot of elements that seem pretty straightforward and things that we've kind of echoed in other ways so far. So there are different kinds of professional or in-home supports, right? If your loved one needs skilled medical care, you're going to have, maybe an in-home nurse who comes and gives medication, monitors blood pressure, things like that. If your loved one has had surgery, for example, maybe dressing those post-surgical wounds. And again, like my situation, they can provide some of that training so that if your loved one has some home medical equipment, you know how to use it properly. There's physical, occupational, and speech therapy. It's pretty straightforward. So being able to help with speech, motor skills, and some cognitive skills. Home care aides. So these are folks that help with what we call the activities of daily living. So things like bathing, dressing, using the restroom, food, making those meals, and can also do some like cleaning and transportation as well. And then there's companion and home help. These are folks that are volunteers usually, and paid help. But they come and basically provide some social interaction. But they can also do a little bit of some light housekeeping and things like that, but not necessarily anything around personal care and certainly not anything medical. Then there's hospice and home care, hospice at home care. So when your loved one's condition is terminal, this will be provided by a team of your doctors, your social workers. You may have some spiritual advisors, people that are part of your community of faith, leaders in your community of faith that are part of that, as well as some trained volunteers. And it's really to provide kind of a holistic group of supports around medical, emotional, and spiritual needs. So that's kind of hospice care towards the end of life. Some questions that you want to ask. What training folks have? Background checks. Are they bound and insured? Workers' compensation coverage. You can ask if you're able to double check any of the references that an agency may have, because that can be really, I think, reassuring and helpful. Ask about backup and replacement policies if the person that you have is sick or unable to come, because that can throw a huge wrench into things, especially if you're an employed caregiver and you have to get to work and you get a call 10 minutes before you're out the door that your aide is unable to come that day, that can leave you in a bit of a crunch. So ask about that policy. Ask about what kind of input you and your loved one have in choosing the aide. A lot of, especially with the volunteer programs, a lot of them have pretty intensive matching kind of policies, so that the volunteer and the individual kind of getting that kind of the social support, they're a good match, and it's a good fit for them. So ask about what kind of inputs and structure there is around that. Ask about restrictions to what they do. Ask about hours and flexibility, because maybe you need someone at your place, right, your loved one's place, from such and such time to such and such time, but that's kind of outside of their operating hours. Ask about how much notice is needed if service is canceled, if you need to make a switch in the schedule. Ask about cost, of course, assurance or supervisory programs. So really getting into, if there is an issue, what's kind of the steps to take. Communication plan to keep families informed. So if someone is coming in while you're away and something happens, what's the communication plan? What's the communication plan if an aide or someone that's in the home notices something? If you're around, they'll more than likely say something, but you really want to be assured with a communication plan. Ask about things like language preference and cultural considerations, because that can play a huge factor into aid choice. Maybe your loved one speaks a different language than English, and you want to make sure that the aide is able to speak that language, to be in communication with them, things like that. And these are things for specifically medical home, medical kind of assistance. Ask if they're certified, range of services, referral from healthcare agencies, ask about the hospital discharge planner and how they recommend the home healthcare agency, staff available at night and on weekends for emergencies. So really getting into those flexibilities of schedule. All right. I've thrown a lot at you, but I think, again, you can see how all of these things come together to really make sure that with the 10 tips, starting there, and then kind of filtering down, you have a good solid base of things to help you as you are going through transitions of care. So a few resources I want to point out here: the Caregiver Help Desk. This is our kind of one-on-one customer support line of sorts for family caregivers. Yes, you can contact them by phone. The phone number is there, but you can also reach out via email and via chat by going to our website. And I'll leave it up for questions. And I'll switch this over so that you can.
Nichole, thank you so much for that presentation and for all of the resources that you shared. There were links that were placed in chat. I'd also point out that on the homepage for the symposium, your PowerPoint is shared so people could download that. One of the things you said was to regularly assess the loved one's home environment. And that kind of fits in with one of the questions that I did see in the chat, was that how can we find resources that may be able to help with making accessible adaptations in the home?
Great question. And that's where I would point you to the Caregiver Help Desk. A lot of these things are community-based. So these are things that are in your backyard or not that far away, maybe not your backyard, a few backyards down. So you want to be able to reach out to them and say, hey, I need, a ramp built. That's a question that we get quite a bit. My loved one had this accident or had this procedure and now is using a walker or a wheelchair or other kind of assisted mobility device. We need a ramp, or we need to make this accommodation in the home. What do we do? They're able to ask you a few questions and really get you pointed in the right direction of, here's some agencies in your area that support you with that, because oftentimes there can be some financial support, and will help make sure that that gets set in place with an agency that's going to do it right.
Thank you. And I like how you said maybe not in your backyard. I used to always say, oh, it's just around the corner, to my wife, and we would go around the corner. She's like, where is it? I said, oh no, I just meant it's close.
Yeah.
So yeah, in your backyard it's close. And I just want to go back to another thing you had talked about
Sure.
earlier on. You just had talked about mental health, right?
Yes.
And I think that is, I would say that's one of the silver linings of the pandemic, is that we now more openly and freely talk about mental health and recognize the importance of mental health. So are there tips you have for people for maintaining their mental health?
Well, I think those 10 tips are all kind of part of that, because they're all part of just kind of maintaining an equilibrium of, tapping into the supports and, not losing sight of taking care of yourself. Those are really the primary. On our website, and I should have thrown a slide in about this, but if you go to our website, we have what's called the Family Caregiver Toolbox. And the Family Caregiver Toolbox is our kind of like, it's our highlight in terms of being kind of the warehouse of our resources for family caregivers. And it is arranged in such a interesting way, because we wanted to make it intuitive. So going into resources that are caring by condition. So if you're looking for something that's Alzheimer's based, you can click on caring by condition and it will show you those resources. But we have what's called the blueprint. Now, the blueprint is basically designed for folks that are caring for a loved one with significant mental health issues. But we do have a few resources there that are an assessment tool. So if you're starting to feel a little off, if you're starting to feel like, all right, I'm not just feeling down, I'm not just feeling sad, there may be something more going on, you can take an assessment, and it's going to help you have those conversations with your healthcare provider to be able to have a more pointed conversation, so you're really getting the help that you need. And it has assessments for all kinds of different mental health issues. So depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder. We worked with Mental Health America on it, and it's wonderful. So I would definitely check that out.
Well, thank you so much for that, for this presentation, a phenomenal presentation. Nichole, again, just thank you so much for sharing your wealth of knowledge with us.
Of course. Thank you so much for having us.